Tonight, we welcome Van Jurin, an educator, historian, and avid supporter of the Perkasie Historical Society. Please welcome Van with artist John Falter and making Perkasie area famous.
Well, thank you very much for the welcome and also inviting me. This is a little bit of a challenge. Why? After many years of research and discovery about John Falter living in our area quite a while ago, because of this painting, and the original painting is in the district office of the school district. I started doing much research, and it came to the point of just too much information. So it's a summary tonight, focus on Perkasie. In fact, it's only going to show really things that are related exactly to this area. When he was living in Hilltown, and I'll mention in just a minute exactly where that was, he did many other illustrations for many different magazines. Plus he was in the Navy, which I'll talk about too. And one of the covers was actually a self-portrait on the Saturday Evening Post. And I have to realize the Saturday Evening Post in the 1940s and 50s and even the beginning of the 1960s, even though it died in about 1972, was the #1 publication in our country. And also was sent around the world too. So when you see a cover, it would really have a broad audience. So let's see. I guess I'll click also here and can talk. That's all right. So here's the picture. And how many of you know about this cover on the Saturday Evening Post, July 7th, 1945. This is the one that made for. Raise your hand. Keep your hand up if you know that it's not real. Okay, it was an imaginary parade because, and this was actually, many of these would have an explanation. He would write it, or the editor of the Saturday Evening Post would do a little blurb on the 4th page of the issue, and he said, well, this was an imaginary parade because the people are just too busy in Perkasie to have 4th of July parades because it's during the war. Now this is really when Hitler had been defeated just before this, and of course we're still fighting for another month when it comes to Japan. So, when did the foreigners come here? 1939. And how did I find that out? Well, by doing newspapers.com and some research, and the Central News of Perkasie showed that in 1939, Mr. and Mrs. Falter actually talked to the Women's Club and also the Lions Club. They were out there. So even though they came here, and why did he come to this spot? Because he was already very noted as an illustrator. Well, probably a couple of reasons, and we'll talk about it in just a moment. But like here, you notice that they had an apartment in New York. So a lot of his covers were actually New York City scenes. But guess what? When he was up in New York, he didn't really do the painting there. He did the painting in his studio in Hilltown. The studio is still, and the farm is still standing. It's on 113, about 3/4 of a mile to the east of Blooming Glen. If you go east on 113, almost a mile, there's a hollow where you have a narrow stone bridge, right? You go up the hill and to the crest of the hill, you'll see there's a couple farms on the right. They're both set back. Well, I believe it's the first one. You'll see a stone house, you'll see a nice barn, and then in between the two, it's sort of hard to see, but there's a smaller building, sort of Dutch style barn, small barn, but actually it's a studio. And you'll see the skylights. The skylights are still on the side, the north side of the roof. Now, you know skylights don't do too well with water, right? Okay, you have leaks. Well, the families who have had the property have really taken care of the studio. One of the tidbits about the studio is a few years ago, the owners knew that they needed to do some renovation because it was starting to leak on the roof and stuff. So when the people came in, they thought they would be nice and shiny. They covered up all Falter's like murals and sketches and stuff that he had put on the rafters and on the walls and all that. So they're gone. But much of his work is still existing because it was published in many different publications. In fact, here's one showing him. And we'll see this also later on. This is Newsweek, all right? And shows him doing a painting probably of a house in Doylestown, I guess it is, but it could be Perkasie. So we got the next one. Jurin Blaine. Now, why would he do illustrations for the widest published magazine, maybe at that time in the world, just of things in Hilltown, in the Perkasie area? Because it was a war. Right? Rationing of gas and all that. So I've discovered that quite often he walked, maybe, or maybe just drove a very short distance to find things that he could actually do illustrations of. These would have been painted. Generally, I understand is he would do a sketch, and then take the sketch back to his studio, and then do the painting. Now, I'm going to tell you some things about his artwork, and because in no way is that possible. He must have been a workaholic, yet I've understood that he basically worked very early in the morning and late afternoon and evening because he did not want direct sunlight. Also, why can you see that studio with its skylights, which are on the north side? You would think you would usually have them on the north side. No, that's an indirect light, right? Artist needs indirect light, not real strong light. So this one is a Moyer's Pond, and I think it's still there. It has the one with the dam. It's shown a part of it. Now, what he did quite often was he would compress a view so it could fit on a magazine cover. Okay, next one. And here is some of the research I found about that particular cover. And why did he pick it? Well, as far as I can figure out is because it was a quiet spot, but it's also fairly close to Philadelphia, New York, which were major publishing centers. Very scenic, real beauty. So you have to envision 1940s, 1950s, right? When you look at his illustrations, you wouldn't think that they would be that interesting today, but to people back then, it would have been very much, and it probably would be settling. Another thing he did quite often in his artwork is have a sense of humor. In fact, a few years ago, the Saturday Evening Post, which is now owned by somebody else, they had a contest to say what was the funniest cover ever on the Saturday Evening Post. And we're talking about many hundreds of covers. Falter's one. You won't see it tonight, but you would have to see it in October. I think it's 25th when I do it in Hilltown, because that's a broader picture about what he was doing when he was in Hilltown. Okay, next one, please. So if you're not in love with what you were trying to put on canvas, you had better quit. Well, I don't know if he died with a paintbrush in his hand, but pretty close to it though. So how many did he? This is just unbelievable. All right? Two other artists, Decker and also the most famous one? Rockwell. What is it? I forget.
Rockwell.
Norman Rockwell, of course. Yes. Norman Rockwell. They outdid him in the number of covers for the Saturday Evening Post. But I doubt if you're talking about his complete corpus of his work, they did not outdo him. Because he actually had a contract in 1930s, where he had to do 3 illustrations for different magazines, what we call pulp fiction or things that would be on the newsstand. 3 of them every week, but he was getting $75 a week. During the Depression, that was quite a bit of money. Okay, then 300 posters. Most of them were positive, but they were, we would call them now motivational posters, all right, for recruitment and all that. But I have found some, and one is very compelling about a man, an American soldier dying on the battlefield, and a poem. Again, that one I didn't have enough time, and it's not directly related to Perkasie, so I had to avoid it. But he did 40 books. One of the books is up here, of course, of another name, color. Then portraits, especially during the end of his career, when the Saturday Evening Post was no longer existing. And I found out that almost 2,300 of his art were covers for books, magazines, and all that, and are actually showing, verified that he did. Now you think about that, even in 50 years, how many that is? He was producing 2, 3 different artworks. And if you look at his artworks, it's detailed. So he really was very gifted. I'll also be talking about how he did artwork, which was different than Norman Rockwell. All right? Norman Rockwell tried to do his style and couldn't do it. Okay, then also had other commissions. Let's go to the next one. So that's what it looks like. That's about, I think, late 40s, early 50s. He also did covers that were related to his childhood. He grew up in, if you go to the next one, that's the painting he was saying brought up. And this is 1946. And he did this for memory. All right, because that's where he grew up. In Falls City, Nebraska. There is a nice museum, but I've only seen it online, but they do a very nice job. And if you're really into Falter, you can go online and see many more of, in fact, all 129 of his covers. Okay, next one, please. So here's an overview of his life. I'll allow you to look at it a little bit. One of the ironic things is, the articles about him and his wife talking to being the presenters at the Women's Club of Perkasie, Lions Club, and things like that, always his wife is referred to as Mrs. Falter. Even though she was a prominent model, maybe that's how they met, she was a model for some of his paintings, and she was also a sculptress, a writer, and yet they didn't use her first name. Regrettably, their marriage didn't last through their lifetime, and Falter did get remarried a couple years after their divorce. First Saturday Evening Post is 1943. Now, he had already been living in Hilltown for 4 years when he did the first one. Don't worry, he was doing a lot of other work. There's other magazines and all things I mentioned. Okay, next one. And in World War II, he was promoted to Chief Petty Officer and assigned to create 300 recruitment and motivational posters. Now, oh, wait a minute. How many of you ever seen those posters, right? They're different. I did one of the waves, you'll see that. And I figured because he was only in the Navy for 2 years. That's what? 104 weeks. To do over 300, he was doing 2 or 3 a week. How's it possible? Now, my guess is the preliminary sketches were given to him for some of them. Okay, since it was for the Navy, the military, they had to get approval, by the government. So my guess is he got a jump start in order to actually produce them. He must have liked also the Philadelphia area. He lived here, and after selling their house, and they had a public auction in 1953, they came back a couple of years later, and they lived in Montgomery County. Yes, he still had a place in New York City. And then he permanently moved to Chestnut Hill in Philadelphia for the rest of his life. And I've talked to one person who, as a young person, I actually met him and talked to him. And let's go to the next one. Just want to show some of his work before he was in Hilltown. But he was doing things like this one in his first years when he was here. Okay, next one. These are for hardcore pulp fiction, little books, paperbacks. Next, this is when he was doing 3 a week. So here's Women's Club. This is October 1939, and even then it says here he's doing Good Housekeeping, Home Journal, The Calls, etc., etc. Okay, next one, please. Now, this is maybe one of his most famous covers because it was used by the Saturday Evening Post every January, I think the second or third week of January, because of the birthday of Ben Franklin. And what's the connection? Well, the newspaper that Ben Franklin started evolved through many different owners and eventually became the Saturday Evening Post newspaper in Philadelphia, which then turned into the magazine. So that's why they honored Franklin. And this is one of his rare portraits that was on the Saturday Evening Post. Most of them are scenes. Okay, next one. So, comparing Falter with, like brain freeze, Norman Rockwell, that Rockwell is older, and the other illustrators, he had really made it. He was really already famous in the 30s and 40s. So Rockwell was our inspiration then. And I found this quote. This is from Falter. I didn't meet him until years later. By the way, he did come to Hilltown. When Rockwell visited Falter at his farm. We would hear that Rockwell had been out on the street in New York City. We all rushed and hunt for him. It tell us that he had looked into a shop window. We had looked in the same window trying to absorb what he looked at by osmosis. Okay, so they were trying to take his. However, Falter's style, and you're going to see a lot more of this, is panoramic, compressed to be on a cover of the magazine. And of course, Norman Rockwell is more one person, two people in a particular situation. And Norman Rockwell tried to do the Falter way, okay, with scenes, and he couldn't do it. He went back to his own style. So he influenced other illustrators. In fact, as you see, there's like a last one for Rockwell briefly had his Falter period of composing paintings using a wide perspective, but not very successful. Okay, next one, please. That is a self-portrait. He did that when he was going into the Navy, and some of the artwork he was submitted, and of course it was up to the magazine when they would actually use it. So it isn't always exactly that week like you painted the week before, etc. However, this is one I think they put on pretty quickly. Okay, this one, I had somebody come up to me at the Hilltown Historic Society's Fall Festival and say, "Oh, that's my grandma." And it's real. She lived in Hilltown, and she did have a son that was in the Air Force. So this is where, did she actually pose for Falter? Not so clear. He knew of her, okay? And maybe just had her pose just for the face. But to show the perspective, how you have the field going out, to lead your eye. Do you see where the field goes to show that make it more meaningful? It goes up to right here, because her son was a pilot. Okay, next one. This is a Hilltown scene. It is a auction, and understand. Some people say, "Oh yeah, I know some of the people that might be in there because their hairstyle and the color of the hair, and they live right near Falter, etc., etc." So this is what he did while he was in the Navy. Now wait a minute. He was doing those posters. He does this also when he's in the Navy. He was also doing covers at the same time. Now there's always a possibility he had finished this before you were in the Navy, submitted it to the Saturday Evening Post, and then they chose when it actually was going to be on the cover. Okay. Here's also a very famous one. This is Blooming Glen, and right here would be Blooming Glen pork now. So you can see you can press it. There is a real creek here. There's also a pond, that probably he did for some of the skating scenes. And as you know, Blooming Glen, there's a big curve, right? So in his little blurb on page 4, Falter says, yes, I had to compress it, and I was using my helicopter view. We call it a helicopter view. Helicopters were, of course, in the 1940s were pretty new. And today we might call it a bird's eye view. All right? So he had to conceptualize this. You would look at a place and then compress it, but also to make sense. So this one is pretty neat. The kids on the last day of school. And if you notice, there is a little stream. This is the Blooming Glen Glenlight Cemetery, by the way, which was first called Perkasie Mennonite. All right, let's go to the next one. And there's what I'm talking about. I won't read this now, but here on the page, usually on page 4, give a description of the cover. However, sometimes they don't give you clues because the editor would write it up, not Falter's input, so it was more generic because, of course, the magazine was going throughout the country. Okay, next. And that's a local write-up that was in the Central News. This one right here, I really had a lot of fun with this one. It doesn't look great, does it? But it's really milky at sunset, okay? And it could be sunrise too, really, quite honestly. And I said, wow, that sort of looks like the farm that's not far from us. We live on Meadow Drive off the Quarry Road near Dublin. And I said, wow, when we go down to the end of our Meadow Drive, you can look up, like in wintertime, you can see the farm where Falter lived, and there's a farm to the right. I think the Mosers were the owners a long time ago, okay, when he was living there. I said, boy, that can't be it. Well, what about this creek? Well, I did a little bit of research, went on Google Map and all that, and this is called Moore's Run, okay? It does really have a sharp turn right where the two farms are. So what he did again was compress what he was really seeing, and do the next one. Within, I would think, 20 feet, this is where he was when he did the sketch. They were about this spot right here. And that is the farm, that would be the Falter farm. You can't always see barely, I think that's right there is a studio, okay? So it's pretty neat that you can actually find where it was. So it shows the power of his imagination, yet using a real scene. Next one. Okay, next. Now this one, we didn't talk a whole lot about this, but what is maybe real in that painting? Yes, there was no real parade, but there are some things that are real. And we want to shout out or raise your hand, or what is real?
The building.
Some of the buildings, exactly. All the buildings are. And also the train, right? Because we're up to 30 to 50 trains a day going through Perkasie at that time, right? And of course, this was the building, J.C. Moyer building that burned down in 1988. And over here is the Arch Street apartments. This building is still standing. This one here is a little bit more generic. Let's probably change that a little bit. That would have been the American House that burned down in 1988. I understand this right here might be sort of real, representing the real police chief and also the gentleman that drank too much in Perkasie, possibly. So you would take some of the reality to make a parade that represented the whole country, really, because probably very few communities were having big parades for 4th of July during the war. Yep, next one. Now this, I'm sorry, you can't really read it, and it's not easy to read even when I blow it up. But this is an article in the News Herald of next week after, Saturday Evening Post had the cover, and the Perkasians are putting down their own towns. That's not a big deal, and wow, we're on the cover, but do we really deserve it, and all that. So, sort of interesting how people felt. And I think it was tongue-in-cheek. I think they were very proud, but they also say, just luck that we're the ones that are on the cover. Okay. This one is actually a cover he did in 1949, and it's his kitchen with the neighborhood kids in it, and showing a mom, working like crazy, getting all to school on time. I thought it was sort of neat to notice that Falter, since it's his kitchen, in Pennsylvania German sgraffito plates on the top shelf of the shelves. Okay, next. Yeah. And there's a description that the kids are from the Kruger, Shu, and Colton families. Any of you know any of them? They would be now, about in their mid to late 70s, I would think. Okay? The kids would be. Next one. And this is a write-up about it. Okay, next. Now this one I had to do a little research. I wasn't so sure it really was a Perkasie, Hilltown, local one, but after finding some articles, and then even finding an entire issue, okay? I've been collecting these, and I have too many of them, and some are being sold or raffled off, and I found an entire one that on page 4 was a description, and actually Falter's talking about this being Wilbur Myers of Silverdale, and he's shooting the horses of his neighbor, Private Moses, okay, that we've seen before. So I thought it was pretty neat. It showed also that even after World War II, there were still horses being, in the area and being used. Here's one that Bonnie Gaiman, who's co-owner of the Treasure Trove, she said that she was in the room across the hall when Falter came to the Pipersville Elementary School to do this. Of course, he didn't do the whole painting there. He did maybe a sketch and maybe just started the painting. But she was only like in 2nd grade, I think she said, and this is the 5th and 6th graders who were getting ready for Christmas. And this is 1951. Anybody that might be in that picture? I've seen the original painting. This one and another one. They invited me into the house. He knew I was doing the research and all that, and it's in great condition. And they really loved it. They also knew Falter indirectly through people in their family who knew Falter very well. Next one. Okay, here's one I also wasn't so sure about until I found a little bit of newspaper articles and all that. And then last September at the Hilltown Fall Festival, somebody came up and said, "Oh, I'm probably one of those kids," because I remember they pulled us out to be a model for Falter when he was doing this. Now that gentleman was, I think, quite a bit older than me, because this is 1950, I believe. So they looked like they're upper elementary school. So you're still doing things locally. Now, where is this? My guess is this. It's either a tall, high place in Hilltown, but I could be wrong. But wasn't there, when Perkasie was still relatively small, before 7th Street was expanded out, I'm pretty sure there was a farm with a barn like this. Okay, I think that barn, in fact, was knocked down not too long ago. Now, not too long ago means in the last 15, 20 years. So it's possible this is at the ridge, because this gentleman actually asked him what school was it exactly. It might have been from the Perkasie schools, when they asked for volunteers to cut line, and so I'm pretty sure it's up on the ridge, looking down, because from the ridge you can go through Hilltown, and it does look seen with this. However, could this be something that people could relate to throughout our country? that, you know, it's specific but general enough that other people say, wow, you know, that brings back memories of my childhood. He did that quite often. Many of his are about his childhood back in Nebraska. Okay. This one I somewhat recently found out was actually a neighbor's wash day. Okay, all he did was, again, this is right before he did the one for the Perkasie 4th of July parade that he found just an ordinary thing. And I said, well, that's sort of boring painting, but there probably was not, right, at that time. That almost every family could relate to having washed out, especially during World War II. Electricity prices more expensive and all that. Yep, this one. Now, I don't know if this is Moyer's Pond, but it's definitely from the area. Okay? Of course, most farmers had a farm pond, but almost certainly it is that. And he was living in the area. This is 1952, so he's still living in Hilltown. Next one. This one almost certain is in Blooming Glen, but I believe this is what is a configuration, imagination, and just thinking about what could have visualized, because he again lived very close to where the Blooming Glen Park is, and there's an old baseball field in the back, okay, near the high school, the old Hilltown High School. And there's a house nearby that looks very much like this one. Okay, next one. Now this is what I think is one that's really sort of forgotten. That's really important to Perkasie. So he didn't just do the parade, but this is real. I really love this one. It isn't just because of the bridge, and I'll mention in just a moment how we can verify that. First, he wrote it as that. Okay, he didn't say exactly Perkasie, but you knew it was a local covered bridge. But look where your eye goes in that painting. Where does your eye go first? How many knows it goes right here with this kid? Right? Sort of in the middle, almost in the middle. He's using a technique artists use to lead your eye. So what he's doing is taking this, and your eye goes down, other kids, all the way down here. Very good photographers quite often will do that. They will have a place somewhere not exactly in the middle of the picture, and then it leads you so you go through the entire picture. Now, how else can we know that this is really the bridge that needs now to be restored in Glenview Park? Right up here, he bothered to actually, this is what's on the bridge about the fine, the $5 fine. He actually bothered to do that too. Okay, next one. Again, this right here. Okay, next. That's him, self-portrait. And he's famous enough that it could be right on the cover of Newsweek, which is, of course, for about news. But where is that house for sure? Could be Perkasie, right? Perkasie does have a fair amount of houses or turrets, okay, the little towers. They could also be Doylestown. I'm not showing many of those today, but he went to Doylestown and also did some paintings. Next one. This was not in great, it's fuzzy, but I found this that people respect his artwork. His illustrators, I know, is a very hot collector's market. It has been for a while. Of course, Norman Rockwell's able to get his millions. John Falter, his paintings, the ones that are really favorites, go well over $100,000 and sometimes close to $500,000. So somebody asked me tonight, where did they go after the Saturday Evening Post? Well, they would have the copyright at that time. So if he got them back, he probably gave them to people. Okay, they were gifts. And of course, he was producing so much artwork, right? He just couldn't keep all of it. And maybe I don't think he was able to sell them. than maybe his estate was, because when he passed away, the Saturday Evening Post, as the publication, was no longer occurring. Okay, next. Here's one you'll see how a picture transforms. I showed the one with the people, the kids on sleighs. Here's one who takes this. Again, do you see where your eye goes? All the way back between mountains. This one is not a Pennsylvania scene, probably. My guess is it's a rendition of many of his memories. All right. I do have a copy of this, because this is, I think, one of the last issues of Saturday Evening Post in winter of 1971. It's a trifold, it folds out, okay, to really show it much wider. Go to the next one, please. And then what they just did was sometimes that, but that opens up and it goes and sees the entire scene. Okay, next one. Now, after he is working, no longer working for the Saturday Evening Post, along with other things, right? He's not just doing it for one publication. He's continuing painting, and he went into more of portraitures. Okay, next one. That's him in his studio. This is now Chestnut Hill. The previous picture of this one is in Chestnut Hill. Okay, and now that's in the museum in Falls City, Nebraska. They took part of his studio from Chestnut Hill and put it there. Of course, here's one of the paintings right here. Okay, next one. And some more information about him. So he painted early morning and evenings. That's to get the right sunlight. He was on the 3rd floor of his Victorian home in Chestnut Hill. And believe it or not, he's in the Cowboy Hall of Fame, okay, as an artist. Now, I didn't talk about that, right? Because he was doing a lot of cowboy illustrations. Now, that's maybe early in his career, which I just showed you like one or two earlier on. And even in his 70s, early, late 60s, he was commissioned by 3M to do a bicentennial collection, and I have some of those also. Again, just didn't have the time to show you. So if you're interested, I will have a different presentation, not totally, by the Hilltown Historical Society in October. Let's go to the next one, please. So if you're curious about him, you can always do a Google on John Falter, but the Falter Museum, very nice website. It's Falls City is not very big. It's called a city, but no, it's not really a city. It might be sort of the size of Perkasie. It's not real far from Kansas City. Saturday Evening Post, family genealogy. I also found that because one thing I've had a hard time finding was census. The 1930 census, 1940 census, 1950. I guess he was moving around so much sometimes they must have skipped him because I couldn't always find where he was living. Okay, my guess is more than New York City is where he said, okay, that's his formal residence. Next one. And also Bucks County Database and Illustration History Museum. Next one. So there's a raffle. You probably saw it when you came in. And I think they're going to pick the winners for what? Community Day?
Community Day, yes.
Yeah, in June. And there's a couple ones here for sale that I brought that are related to the Perkasie area. And I guess we can turn the lights on, or I'll take any questions, but I know it's already 12 after 8. Any questions? Possibly.
Where do they live in Worcester? Do you know?
You can find that. I have that information, but it's in my folder over here. It would take some time for me to tell you, but it's not too far. It's like Worcester, Montgomery County. I don't know the exact location. That I do not know, but it probably could be found if you really want to find out where the exact address was. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
I was hoping I'd see the sensing form.
So,
It's a hill town like,
right?
you know where I mean?
Yes, I do, because we're in walking distance. My wife and I live very close to that.
I'm sorry, what?
We live very close to that.
Oh,
Yeah, and the Sessinger farm is maybe abutted. His farm are pretty close to it. They would be neighbors, okay, distant farm neighbors.
my sister married such
Yes,
so.
uh-huh. Well, it's
And they have
possible.
the magazine.
Yeah, it could be, because sometimes he would do a little bit of liberty that, you know, the barn, there's several barns, and say, okay, that barn's more appropriate for the cover. So he wasn't cheating, he was just using the area in order to get a sense of farm life or life during
I think the house is little.
it
My
could be.
sister has it, twin.
I'd be very interested in seeing, because maybe, I know of all 129, covers that he did. But he might have done it for another publication. He was even doing things sometimes with hunting and fishing, and, you know, so it's possible for another publication. Any other questions? I'm just curious, how many of you knew about Falter before tonight? Knew about him? Okay, pretty good. And that's one of the purposes of, yes, what's that?
That's the woman that built that.
Okay, yes.
White scramble.
All right, there you go. So that's the one that had a son who was in the was it Air Force, I think?
Yes, Army Air Force.
Right, exactly. So, yes, and that's what we're trying to do. I think one purpose of presentations like this is not just to entertain you, but also continue the history that it is not totally forgotten. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.